Hello, everyone. Thanks for clicking on today's video. My name is Sissy, and I love arts and crafts and sharing my silly thoughts on random things. I absolutely love to bake, though I have zero training and am a complete and utter amateur. I do it for fun and relaxation too, and of course for the wonderful smells that permeate the house. Yes, once in a blue moon, I do get a ready made pie crust, but it's rare, and I do my best to make everything from scratch. I cook too, although I admit I love baking more than I do cooking. I feel like there's something so mathematical about baking. Everything must be very precise, and if something is off slightly, the recipe will be off and it won't be right. I personally have a much harder time with cooking because so much of it is how one feels about the food and the aroma and the taste, and I just much prefer being given precise directions and measurements. What do you mean I just know when the steak is speaking to me? What do you mean by it even speaking to me? With baking, I can calculate what altitude I am in order to ensure my souffle doesn't deflate, and I know at what temperature to set my oven so that my cheesecake doesn't crack. Now, I am not saying my baking is perfect. Far from it. Like painting, my baking doesn't always come out how I imagine it. I am definitely rough around the edges when it comes to decorating, and my bread kneading still needs practice. But that's one of the things I love about baking. I love practicing again and again until I can create something wonderful. I wanted to get better, so starting at the beginning of 2023, I have been making desserts for family members for every birthday and for holidays. So at least once a month, I've been baking something by getting their suggestions and attempting requests. I enjoy it because, like I said, it's relaxing, but it also helps me practice learning different baking skills, and my family and I have had the joy of trying new dishes. For this video, I am making a few different things as requested by loved ones. The reason I have a few dishes here is because I'm still learning the best way to film these things, and I haven't gotten the best footage so far. Oh well. For this first item, I am attempting a red velvet cheesecake cake, and I was a total dum dum who forgot to get a video or even a picture of the inside, which is an absolute shame because the layers came out so pretty and looked like a peppermint candy almost with the layers of red and white. I also made something I had never heard of before, as featured in the second bake potato chip cookies. Yeah, have you guys heard of them? My husband and I grew up on different sides of the country, so maybe it's a regional thing, but my husband told me that his grandmother used to make this cookie when he was a kid as we were discussing what to do with extra potato chips that we had left over from a party. So I tried it and they came out pretty tasty. They were a little more crunchy than I was hoping. I like a soft cookie and I think I overbaked these a little, but they were good. I wasn't sure what to expect, but they remind me of a shortbread cookie, though slightly less dry and with a little bit of a crispy texture from the potato chips. I quite liked them, and I am not a cookie person unless it's a classic chocolate chip. These cookies also took 4 sticks of butter, which is probably more butter than I've ever put in anything. The last dish is bread, not dessert, but I enjoy attempting to bake bread, and I actually feel like it's harder to do than a lot of desserts. My goal is to be able to get good at baking bread and then find the time to be able to make my own sourdough starter someday. Ooh, sourdough. That is my absolute favorite type of bread. Today, however, I am making pumpernickel for the first time, and although it could definitely be better, I didn't think it came out too bad for a first try. It was really tasty, but for some reason, it was so hard to find rye flour. Is that normal? I had to go to like 4 different grocery stores before I was able to find any. I even tried ordering online, but twice I was sent regular all purpose flour instead, which wasn't what I was looking for. Those are the dishes that you will see in the background today, and the topic is a story I will share about the time I was asked to bake a wedding cake. Fun fact about me, I don't like cake at all. Any kind of cake, you name it, I don't like it. And I can't say for sure why I don't like it, although I will say I'm not exactly a big fan of sweet things. I like certain ingredients that appear in cake, like chocolate, for example, but itself, especially cupcakes, do not get me started on this ridiculously overrated dish. Just gives me zero desire to eat it. As I said, I do enjoy baking, so I have no problem making cake, and I actually enjoy the process. But even when baking a cake, I have no desire to even try it, which I actually feel kind of guilty about when I'm baking because I've often heard the saying, is it a saying? That if a cook doesn't try his or her dish along the way, you should be wary. That's why I have my husband to taste test my food. I actually get excited when other people enjoy my baking and like the cakes I make, and that's totally worth it, even if I'm not a fan of what I'm making. On that note, another fun fact about me is that I have made a wedding cake before. Once. Yeah, and it's a story too. Back in college, I knew a woman who was a little bit older than the average student. She was in her 40s at the time, and most of us were in our very early 20s or late teens. And I had a couple of classes with her, and she kind of ran with my group. We weren't close, but we would often be in the same study group. One day, I was sitting with her and some other friends, and she told us she was getting married. We were all very excited for her, and she asked if we could do some things to help her out. Again, I didn't know her very well, but I thought, sure, why not? Everyone was very eager to help her. So, like the other girls, I agreed. She asked me if I can make food. I was about 18 or 19 at the time, and I wasn't quite sure where this was going. In my head, I'm going, well, I know how to boil water, so sure. I said, yes, what can I do? She then asked me if I could bake. I said, well, I could probably make some basic things. My mom taught me how to make cookies. She said, can you make cupcakes? Sure, I can make cupcakes. Okay, can you make 50 cupcakes? I'll supply the ingredients. Okay, no problem. I said 50 cupcakes was a fair amount, but I don't have to buy the ingredients. And I knew my mom would help me because I was still living at home at the time. So I thought, fine. She assigned the girls some other things, and we were to meet up again in a week to get ingredients. And I think at this time, the wedding was about a month away. Well, I went home, told my mom. She's like, yeah, we can make cupcakes. A week later, we all get together again, and the bride hands me a plastic bag of a few things and said, you're making my wedding cake, right? I just kind of looked at her. Again, I'm a kid at this time. I didn't know that it was totally fine to say no to doing something you didn't want to do. I didn't know that it was totally fine to disagree to something and still be a friend. I said, oh, I thought you wanted me to make cupcakes. I changed my mind, she says, and I want you to make my wedding cake. You can do that, right? I was like, sure. Knowing in my head that a wedding cake, like, there's a reason they're expensive. I knew even at that age that there is a lot that goes into a wedding cake. I asked her what she wanted, absolutely screaming in fear internally. Also, keep in mind, and please don't think I'm a snob, but I want to tell you what was going through my head at that age. I will say that I grew up in a fairly well to do family and had attended a fair amount of weddings by that age. I knew that typically a wedding cake was ordered from a professional baker and that the cake took up a fair amount of the budget. I also believed that it took time to plan a typical wedding and that a lot went into it. I was not used to a mutual acquaintance relying on young college age friends to throw together a wedding. Again, please, please don't think I'm some kind of snob. A wedding is amazing no matter where it is or what it is, and I really didn't learn that until I left the bougie world after college and made my own way in life. Heck, some of my favorite weddings have been in family members' backyards with homemade barbecue and the bride's grandmother making the cake. So please don't take what I say the wrong way. I was also a student at a very expensive private school where students came driving in their brand new Porsches and Mercedes that daddy bought for them. I was panicking, thinking this woman had seriously overestimated my zero skills as a baker and that she was expecting this incredible cake that you see in the movies. How would you like it to look? I asked. She said, well, I gave you cake mix and fondant. I want a 2 tier cake, all white, with a ribbon of purple fondant around the bottom of each tier and flowers of different shades of purple around the cake. She showed me a picture of a spectacular but fortunately small cake. I quickly said, I don't think it will come out quite like that. She said, you told me you can make a cake. I should have said, well, you asked me if I could make cupcakes, and I said yes. Instead, I just smiled because I didn't know what else to do and said, yes, I can make you a cake. I didn't even look in the bag that she gave me. All I noted was that the bag was from the dollar store. Again, I'm not knocking the dollar store. I shop at one myself all the time and have found some gems. This is 18-year-old me thinking, okay? I just took it straight home to my mom, whose jaw nearly fell on the floor when I told her I had to make a wedding cake. She said, okay, don't panic. We can do it. My mom is amazing, and shout out to all the awesome moms who have helped their daughters in a crazy pinch. Oh, and did I mention I had about 4 days before the wedding to figure out how to make a wedding cake? Yeah, it turns out the bride had moved up the wedding date and didn't tell us until that second meeting after she gave us all more instructions. But whatever, at this point, I had committed. My mom and I opened the bag and took a peek inside. Inside, there were a couple little squeezy tubes of purple food coloring, one box of Funfetti Angel Food cake mix. For those of you who bake, you know that this kind of cake mix doesn't do terribly well with fondant. A container of vanilla frosting and a package of pre made fondant. My mom has made cakes in the past, not wedding cakes, not fondant cakes, but she has made cakes. So I looked at her and she looked at me and says, I've never worked with fondant because it isn't easy, but we'll attempt it. Though this was still the early days of YouTube, my mom and I watched several videos on what we could find on how to work with fondant, and then we began. The cake was easy to make. Even making two different sizes of cake to put together was easy. That was not the hard part. The fondant was difficult. This was my first and so far last time I've used fondant. Maybe I'll attempt to work with it again in the future. Who knows? I don't know if it would be easier to work with if it's made from scratch. I have no idea. But unless it's rolled out to the same thickness all around, can't be too thick or too thin, it's hard to apply it to your liking. Also, like I mentioned, the cake underneath the fondant makes a huge difference, which my mom knew, but this was what we had to work with. At first, once we figured out how to smooth the fondant, the cake looked okay. There were no sharp edges like a nice wedding cake, and it was a little lopsided, but it was all right. The cake quickly began to sag because the fondant was too heavy for the cake, but then it just kind of settled. We also discovered it wasn't the easiest thing to fold in various shades of purple to get the desired effect we were looking for. I had been given a picture of the bride's sash as she wanted me to match the purple and the ribbon of fondant to her dress, and we tried. We also had no idea how to make flowers out of fondant, so we used cookie cutters and our hands to try to mold something that resembled a flower of some kind. They kind of came out looking like, gosh, do you guys remember the old Easy Bake Oven and the desserts you could make? I feel like there was one flower shaped something, and I picture our flowers coming out looking like that. Or maybe Play Doh or something. Again, the cake was not the worst looking thing on the planet. We did our very best, but it didn't look like a professional cake by any means. I brought it in warily on the day of the wedding. I hadn't shown the bride what the finished product looked like because she said she wanted to be surprised. I took it in the reception area, which was outside, and set it on the table. I was just going to beat it when I came across another mutual friend who said that the bride wanted me to be there, even though I hadn't gotten an invitation and didn't bring a gift and wasn't exactly dressed for a wedding. I sat in the ceremony in my ripped jeans and Ugg boots, and there was a small handful of other people in the room. I sat there, dreading every moment. I sat alone on what I think was the bride's side, panicking over this cake. After the ceremony, the bride and groom went outside and went straight up to the cake. I think they liked it. I'm not really sure. They didn't say anything, and I didn't hear anything. After a brief time, I left because I did have to get back to school. I had a class that afternoon, and I didn't really want to hear what people thought. I do hope they enjoyed it, and I hope that I didn't ruin their wedding. I really wish I still had a picture somewhere to share, but it was such a long time ago. Anyway, that's my wedding cake story. I have not made a wedding cake since then. I've made birthday cakes, I've made cakes for holidays, but not weddings. I've also learned since then that although I am always more than happy to attempt something for someone, I tell them up front, I have not made this before, please bear with me, and that if there is something I cannot nor want to make, I say it. And you know what? I haven't lost a friend or family member over it yet. I am planning on doing a video on the history of wedding cakes at some point because I am interested, but I thought it might be fun to start by sharing my story of the time I made a wedding cake. Have you ever been roped into making one or making something that is really out of your comfort zone? I'd love to hear your story. I hope you enjoyed this video and thank you so much for listening. Please like and subscribe. Have an amazing day, and I'll talk to you again soon.